Today, instead of a question, right, like last week, right, from a respectable, wealthy member of the community, somebody who would be a perfect disciple because not only does he bring interest and passion, but bags of money to help keep things funded, right? We hear from Mark about a blind beggar. So socially, about the lowest person you can imagine in that first century world. Bartimaeus would be someone who was familiar to everybody in Jericho because he would spend his days sitting by the road asking for alms, asking for help. And it was the duty of an obedient and pious Jewish person to provide alms to the poor. So it was sort of like a social support system built in. And so that's how he would spend his days, because as a blind person, he would have a hard time doing much of anything in that agrarian world. Now, because he's sitting by the road all the time, he's a fixture, right? It's part of Jericho. He's Bartimaeus of Jericho. The people know him, and you notice today there's not just Jesus and the 12 disciples like have been wandering around Galilee, but there's Jesus and the 12 disciples and a crowd. And they're not just a crowd of people who came out to see what was going, but it seems like they're a little bit more connected to Jesus, and maybe a bigger crowd of people growing around Jesus as he makes his way through Galilee toward Jerusalem. If you remember in our past readings, right, they were north of Capernaum, and they were in Capernaum for a while. Now they're making their way towards Jerusalem, walking through Galilee. People are gathering who are kind of curious. People are gathering who feel some attraction. People who are gathering are probably our disciples who we don't know the name of. And then there's the apostles and Jesus. There's the women. There's a whole bunch of people who are that we know about, but then lots of people that we don't know by name. Then they're gathering. This group is getting bigger and bigger, like a caravan as it travels along from Galilee to Judah and then up to Jerusalem. And that's the next thing before Jesus. Jericho is like the last big stop in the road to Jerusalem. And the 3,000-foot climb from Jericho to Jerusalem. So you always go up to Jerusalem, and it literally is up. Now, Bartimaeus, as that blind beggar, he's the polar opposite of this rich young ruler we heard about for the last couple weeks. He has nothing. Probably has nowhere to live. He depends totally on the generosity of those passing by, or the sympathy of those passing by to give him something so he can subsist, he can survive. Unlike the rich young ruler who, no problem. Since he's a youth, he kept he had the money and the means and the time to keep all of the law, to study the law, to learn about it, to be sure that he got every little tittle and jot in place. But keeping the commandments was not something, in that way anyway, to that degree, was not something that blind Bartimaeus had the luxury to ponder. So there's some aspects of faith. Think about that. There's some aspects of pursuing faith in Judaism and Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, organized faith. There's some aspects of pursuing it that require wealth. Blind Bartimaeus didn't have any of that. So his focus was very, very direct and very in the moment. So he hears the crowd murmur, Jesus is coming. Because everywhere Jesus went, before he got there and when he arrived, people were all stirred up. And he hears that he's coming, and he knows. He says, this is my help. This is the one who will help me. He's heard about him because the word about Jesus has gone out over these past several years while he's been walking with his disciples and going places and healing people and helping people and teaching. And though he is blind, he sees Jesus as his only hope for his deepest wish. To be able to see. He didn't want riches. He didn't want an easy life. He didn't want a new car or a new cart and an ox. He didn't want fields. He didn't want a vineyard. He just wanted to be able to see. Something most of us, know and take for granted every day. So he shouts. Because remember, he's blind, so he's not wandering around. He knows there's a lot of people around him. He's sitting at the side of the road on the dirt, right, sitting there. And he shouts, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." He wants it happen. He shouts it again, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Shh, 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 Barton, keep quiet. Come on. And he won't let him keep him quiet. And Jesus hears him. Jesus hears him. And he's shouting this to the annoyance of the crowd, much like the little children annoyed the disciples. Remember a few weeks ago, the little children came to Jesus. Parents were bringing their children, and Jesus was taking them in his arms and holding them and blessing them. And the disciples said, Go, don't bother Jesus. He's busy. This is the same thing, except now it's this crowd. And Jesus, just like with the little children, Jesus insists on receiving the blind beggar, the blind Bartimaeus. Bring him over. He's calling you. Go to him, they say. Suddenly the crowd turns from telling him no, unlike the disciples, the crowd turns from telling him no when they see Jesus welcoming him to saying, "Oh, go to him, quick." So in some ways, this crowd of sort of disciples is a little bit more focused on Jesus than the disciples themselves at times and what's important to Jesus. So if you remember too, this is now a while ago, right? Jesus had a conversation with his disciples. We heard about that. Just with his disciples, just with the apostles. And he said, the 12, and he said, "Who do people say that I am?" Do you remember that conversation? And then after they told him a few things, he said, "But who do you say that I am?" And one of them, Peter, says, "You are the Christ, the Messiah, the promised one." Right? And Jesus then says, "Yep, you don't tell anybody. Be quiet. Keep it a secret." All right? Because it's politically explosive. This is insurrection stuff. This is an attack on the state and the church, which was everything in Israel. Right? And so he tells them not to repeat the title. But notice, Jerusalem's ahead, the next stop. He doesn't say, "Don't call me that." That's the same thing Bartimaeus saying, "Son of David." He's basically calling him a king. The promised one who's going to come. Which means all those people in power up in Jerusalem, they're nothing. It's Jesus. That's political, it's insurrection talk, it's heresy talk. And Jesus says, it's okay now, because the next thing is Jerusalem. Now, not reflected in the English, because I don't know why, but anyway. But in the Greek, Bartimaeus calls Jesus Rabboni. Not rabbi, not teacher, Rabboni. Do you remember anybody else calling Jesus Rabboni? Who? Mary Magdalene at the tomb, right? Thinks she's found the gardener. "Where'd you lay him?" And he says, "Mary." And she says, "Rabboni." It's a very intimate term for a student to call a teacher that. It says that you know them. So Bartimaeus is immediately suggesting a connection to Jesus. Maybe from the things he's heard, maybe, I don't know what, whatever, from the Spirit working in him. It shows deference and respect and trust. That is, is the mark of a student who dearly loves their teacher. We could do worse than aspire to that tenderness and toward and trust in Jesus. So, what does Jesus do? Go your way. Your faith has healed you. Your faith has healed you. Your trust in me you've been healed. And Bartimaeus has his sight, and he goes his way. Set free from, I got to read this, it's a quote, and it was really good. Bartimaeus, now set free from his blindness, represents all those who have found enlightenment and follow the Master. It's from R.T. France. We are Bartimaeus. We are blind. Only Jesus can help us see. That's my thought on R.T. France. We are Bartimaeus. We are blind. Only Jesus can help us see. Now Luther, this is Reformation. Massive feedback. There we go. Thank you. Luther, like Bartimaeus, turns to Christ as his only hope for his help with a question, right? This is the question of the rich young ruler. What must I do to be saved? Luther had the same question. And he punished himself mercilessly as a monk in his early years, following all of the penitential practices that were known of fasting and seclusion and silence and flogging and all this other stuff to try to beat his sense of sin out of him. Until, with the help of his confessor, he realized that the only hope was to turn to Jesus. Right? I am yours, save me. That was the line, that was the phrase that his confessor totally fed up with him coming to confess the most minuscule things, said, look, turn to Christ. Save me, I am yours. Save me, I am yours. Which is what Bartimaeus literally did. Seems that by that it seems likely that he became a follower because it doesn't describe anything after that. We don't know much about him. But his salvation and his eyes were opened again just in following Jesus. Luther's eyes were opened again by the Word and by the Holy Spirit to follow Jesus. So may Luther and Bartimaeus inspire us to call out for Jesus' mercy on us and embrace God's holy word and our following of Jesus.